Yo, and welcome to the 46th episode of Lake of Rage, a Pokemon trading card game podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Clementi, aka Mellow_Magikarp. I've been joined today by a returning special guest host. We have returning for the second time, Joe Bernard, aka Omnipoke.
Thanks for having me on. Happy to be back on the Lake of Rage.
Did I even say that properly? Are you Omnipoke, or is Omnipoke technically both?
It's both of us.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'll take it.
So we got a very special episode for y'all planned today. We're going to very quickly jump into TPCi's new COVID guidelines that just got released, which seems like a very good sign for future events actually happening. And then we're going to talk about the upcoming Brilliant Stars expansion with our first guest, who has spent a very significant amount of time playing in the new format, which is, of course, Joe. I've played 0 games with the format so far. And then we're going to get him some questions from Twitch chat. As always, we are live on twitch.tv/mellow_Magikarp. So first, some housekeeping. We took last week off because we'd been planning these Brilliant Stars episodes, and we were like, all right, we got this. And then we realized Brilliant Stars comes out at the end of February. And it was like, I don't want 6 episodes in a row of Brilliant Stars. We're going to take a week off. I assume it's felt the same for you over on the YouTube channel, right? Where it's just like, oh my God, there's so much.
We're having to separate it a bit. I mean, we start really early. So yeah, we have to like throw some questionable stuff out there just to fill the void, basically.
So we're already on the LDF level videos.
Yeah, I mean, I spent like one video all about Arceus and then realized that that's basically the only deck that we get from the set. So now I'm doing like lots of questionable stuff, but it's fine.
We'll get into some of the Arceus stuff because I think there's a lot there to unpack. But So real quick, in that week that we didn't go on, I managed to win my team challenge. So I'm excited to announce I'll be playing for Tabletop Village yet again in this team challenge. And it's something that I've got to say because, Joe, I assume you have the same thing happen. When the eyes are on you playing hundreds of games in front of many, many, many people, a lot of people will tend to watch your misplays very closely and forget that, your boy's a pretty good Pokemon trading card game player. So got to remind y'all real quick on that one. I'll be playing in the team challenge, and good luck to everyone else who is competing in their team challenge. Are you playing in any teams, or are you above that?
I'm like the stand-in. If ever there's people that want to be a team together, and if they need me to be an extra like body in there for the shop or whatever, I can, but I'm not like trying to go far or anything.
Okay, that's totally fair. It's one of those, for me, it was like, it's an official Pokemon event. I'm going all in. And it was the one,
makes sense.
I rewatch my streams to rewatch my gameplay to like improve as a player, right? And watching myself play the team challenge, I'm like, oh, I'm actually trying this time. Compared to playing in like a Hegster or something where it's like, oh, I'm joking with chat and all that stuff. And yeah,
yeah.
You slap that official Pokemon event on there and I'm like, I'm in, bro.
Juicy. Yeah.
So speaking of official Pokemon events, we just got an announcement from Play Pokemon about their COVID-19 guidelines. So really quickly report on what that is. So if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go check it out. It's all over Twitter. It's all over wherever you need to go find it under the Play Pokemon page on Pokemon.com. But some of the stuff, in order to enter and compete in a regional level event, you do need to be vaccinated. You need to be boosted, assuming, and I missed this one, I don't know if you saw it, if your country is legally allowing you to become vaccinated, correct? So like certain like juniors may not be able to in certain countries. So is there a ruling on that one?
I think if you're under the age of 12, you only need 1 vaccine dose, I think it is.
Okay.
Within like 6 months, something like that. I think you still have to have 1. It's just like you don't have to be double jabbed and boosted, just because of the age. Like they were like later in the wave, right? So many of them still will only be at that 1, just in terms of the date range right now.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, check your age. I assume everyone who's listening to this is a master's anyway, but there's plenty of Poke parents who do listen to this for sure. So check the age for your children, because in order to even enter the venue, they'll need to receive a wristband with the proof of vaccination. And this one caught me off guard, and I'm going to be 100% honest, I'm very into it, a negative COVID-19 result as well. So you'll need to get a COVID test before you can even enter into the regional. I mean, you can enter it. You just can't literally go into the regional. They will take your money to register. So
pretty much.
Don't assume registration automatically puts you in there. And they said that'll give you a wristband that you will have in order to enter the venue. And they also have a masking policy too. It's not just any face covering. It is an N95 or any other equivalent variant level mask. It is a surgical mask, or it is a double layered cloth mask, correct?
Yeah, so it's not just one of those like fashionable ones that you just sort of have. It needs to actually be functional as well.
You hate to see it, or love to see it. I'll let you figure out which one I'm on that. But yeah, so make sure you have all of that stuff in order. Make sure to bring extra masks too. I assume everyone else in the world has been out there and it snaps in the middle, and yep, you don't want that to be happening to you. And make sure you know how to wear a mask. I will happily call a judge if I tell you to put it over your nose and you don't. Just throwing that out there for the world. Highly recommend everyone else do that too. Joe, are you getting kind of excited?
Oh, I'm super excited. Yeah. So Liverpool's end of March for us. So we'll have seen Salt Lake's results, but I'm still like buzzing at the idea of coming back. And it's been like 2 years since I've seen so many people, and I really am ready to. Yeah.
That's part of the thing I'm excited for too. I kind of take it for granted because my locals are back, but locals means people within about a 20 to 30 minute drive of the store, as opposed to locals being people 3 states away, which is a very large difference.
Yeah, and it's countries away for me because it's Europe events, right? So literally just wouldn't even have the possibility of like bumping into them randomly or whatever. So yeah.
That's got to be so nice though. Like it's got to be so easy to go to all of the European events, right?
It's pretty good, yeah. So Liverpool is obviously in the UK. Lille is drivable for me, which is in France, and then Germany is like a couple-hour flight. So it's all very easy for the first few regionals.
Are you a grinder? Or are you someone who's going to be at every event?
So I've got the invite already 2 years ago. I'll definitely go to the 3 regionals. I don't think I'll go to the specials though. I might still go to like one of them because I think it lands on a weekend where there's already like I already have the Friday off just because it's a bank holiday. So that might work out well, but I will definitely do the regionals at least.
Okay, let's go. That's exciting. I'm currently planning on 2 regionals, which is disappointing once I really thought about it, but
hey, it's a mini season, right?
Exactly. So like you, I've got my invite, so I don't have to push anything.
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
Like, do I really want to go to Milwaukee? Like, you know what? No.
I do think that everyone is like collectively so much lazier now that we've had like COVID. Like actually leaving the house is like a deal now, and you have to convince yourself to actually do it. So that's going to be a bit of a strange thing to remind yourself that like waking up at 5 was like a normal thing sometimes.
Have you put any thought into like what the sizes are going to be of like, do you expect European regionals to be larger than normal, back to the same size, smaller?
It's really is a guessing game because like the only like small local tournaments that I've been to has been like pre-releases, and there's like a good amount of new people around and there's a lot of new excitement around. So it's balancing like how many people do I think will actually still come back and be interested in the game. I could see it being like 70%. I could see it being like 50%. And then there's the new blood coming in and whether they'd feel comfortable attending a regional for like whatever reason. If they've only been online players, they may be more COVID conscious if they're worried about like a few hundred people all there at once. So it could be the biggest regional we've ever had, or it could be like essentially like a special event and only break like 200 people for Europe or something. So it's anyone's guess, really.
So forgive my ignorance on anything about European regionals, but what is the largest? Not like obviously not EUIC, but you know, obviously not the exact number, but like a ballpark.
Off the top of my head, it would probably be between 500-600. I think would be one of our biggest regionals. I think it's been around there. Yeah,
that's a pretty good size event. So you're thinking, obviously, you said it could be anyone's guess, but like it's not unrealistic.
I would hedge probably around like the 300 mark. I think would be where my head would be at if I had to take a guess.
I'm torn on Salt Lake on what I think because everyone keeps posting their plane tickets. And I live super close to the state. So I'm like, it's like $350, which is like a lot for being so close, but also is cheap for US standards. And other people are like, oh, it's like, you know, these massive $600-700 flights. And it's like, ooh, what I thought was going to be 1,000-person regional might actually be US small, which is probably about a 500-600 person regional. So I'm super curious what that size is going to be.
Yeah, it's a big balance between all of those factors, so it's really difficult to say.
And I got to let you plug it because I assume it's going to happen. But are you going to have any regional prep stuff ready for any of this, for any new players?
Yeah, tons of those videos are going to start coming out. I think we'll probably do a quick like PSA style video just for these restrictions and requirements, just so that everyone's aware of those. And there will be like breakdowns of top things to do before heading back to IRL, as well as like breaking down the decks and all that good stuff closer to the time.
Beautiful. I love it. Because that's some of the biggest questions I get asked, and I assume you do too. It's not about the meta. Obviously, you get a million questions about what's the meta going to be? What's this going to be? But like, what do I bring? What do I do when I'm there? How long do I plan? Like all this kind of stuff that like I take for granted having friends when I first started because I started IRL, right? And when you start online, you don't have those people who you can rely on. So there's so much good stuff out there that check out youtube.com/Omnipoke.
Yep.
Let's go.
That's the one.
Speaking of youtube.com/Omnipoke, always be selling. See, this is how you do it. When I came into your chat earlier, like, oh, what's the podcast? You got to say the name. But speaking of that, you've been testing a heck of a lot on that channel for some of the brilliant stars. So I want you to kind of lead us a little bit, but what are some of the top performing decks, let's say besides Mew? For simplicity, but we can roll back around to Mew if you want to. So what are some of the top performing decks you've been having so far in your Brilliant Stars testing?
So Brilliant Stars is actually one of these weird sets where in terms of like new attacking Pokemon, it's looking like its Arceus is like by far the best. And there's not a whole lot else that's super enticing. So really it's like looking at engines and how those things change. In terms of Arceus decks, I think it's pretty obvious that Mew is still like public enemy number one. So we're probably looking towards some dark package being like a popular and pretty obvious like include. So it's the likes of Galarian Moltres. Galarian Zapdos is just a good card in this meta because it now hits Arceus for weakness. It hits Gengar for weakness, which is already one of the best checks in the game to Mew. And it's also getting a lot more value early on in the game because there's Ultra Ball now in the format, which means there's more Crobats and Luminion V coming into play quickly. So Zapdos is live for one attachment from turn one against a good amount of matchups, actually, if people are trying to develop like multiple basics and whatnot. So I think there's a very easy build of Arceus that's just playing the Galarian Birds and maybe a couple other Dark Mons in there. And I think that's pretty low to the ground and reasonable. Arceus seems very strong going first and is still probably unfavored, even with all the dark stuff, going second into Mew, provided they actually pop off with Sparkle and attack you. So it's not actually like that crazy. It's not as simple as just like, duh, Moltres wins me this game. Because sometimes Mew is just going to outrace regardless, but because you're forced to knock out Meloetta most of the time. So it's not as simple as that.
I know we weren't supposed to talk about Mew, but you said as long as Mew just doesn't go Meloetta turn one and knock you out. How often is that happening?
It is much more consistent. it is much more consistent. So Ultra Ball opens up Phone to be like far, far stronger opening turn. So it's not just Cram Heads flips anymore. It's also like Phone hitting the big cards, right? Hitting the Sparkle itself, hitting the Fusion Energy itself, or hitting like VIP Pass to go wide early on. So Ultra Ball means that you just have way less bricks. It takes away like some of the weakest cards currently in the deck, be it like the Switch Cups, the Great Balls, those sorts of cards. And you just go, high for Crystal Count, 4 Quick, 4 VIP, 4 Ultra. You really just churn through that deck now even more than ever. You don't mind seeing the 3 copies of Sparkle because sometimes 2 to play is good, but just seeing 1 early and then having so much good redundancy of just pitching with Ultra Ball now and Quick Ball is just crazy. So yeah, it's actually bizarre that whenever I go back onto Standard now, I feel like Mew is a brick, which is like so bizarre to think about. Standard Mew being like probably the most consistent deck we've ever seen in Pokemon. And after playing with Ultra Ball, you just feel it so much that you're like crossing your fingers over 1 Cram Heads or crossing your fingers over a Great Ball. And that's just kind of like gone now. So Mew is actually probably the biggest winner from the set, which is super scary to say. But that's just because Genesect makes such good value of Ultra Ball, which is already a nuts card.
So that Arceus caveat of going first is great when Mew doesn't get the Meloetta is essentially...
No, it's great going first whenever. Because as long as you can put a 1 prize active, right? That's basically the mission for every deck, right? If you're going first against Mew, get a 1 prize in the active position, make them high roll with catchers if they're fitting those into a deck, even with Ultra Ball now, or make them hit like the rope plays. Make them have everything. That's the only thing you can really do. So my checklist for most decks now is shoving in random 1 prize Pokemon that give you a bit of value that can be a punching bag turn 1 against Mew if you've gone first. Because if they take those 2 prizes, they've won almost always, I think. Because even like fans don't stop them anymore because they have double turbo energy. Like there's so many, like the counterplay is basically path and cheese them, or only give up that 1 prize turn 1. Yeah,
I'm gonna say discourage, but
it's scary. But because I mean, yeah, maybe I'm being a bit sort of facetious and saying that like they always get it and whatnot, but it feels like if you want to have a solid new game plan, you need to be like very pure to 1 prize, play like some path stuff, or play what we've seen with Sir Fetched recently, which is like play Cincino Engine and like the Clara package or whatever, draw a ton of cards, just say that you don't play any hand disruption, and attack them like 3 times with Bird or whatever. Yeah,
okay. That seems fair. I guess I did kind of forget that like Bird does still. So anyway, go back to your Arceus. It's ADP Birds all over again, except we've lost the Dialga and the Palkia.
Basically, yeah. And then my next favorite Arceus deck is Duraludon Arceus. It feels like the greens deck of the format for me.
Is that a real... Like, I get it, because Duraludon's biggest weakness has always been setting up. But, like, that's not a meme. That's actually better than the Zacian version.
It's performing, like, really good for me, I think. Yeah, because I think the bigger problem for Duraludon, other than being, like, a bricky pile sort of thing, is that it just lacks so much tempo. It gives up 3 turns to just do stuff and tries to catch up. Whereas now you go first and you turn to Arceus attack. That's like ridiculous pressure. You've got 6 energy on the board, and like even if they're gusting a 250 hit point basic Duraludon, you just put down the next one, right, and attack with Arceus again and set up the next one. So they have to get through a lot of meat just in general. The ability is good, but now you're in the like case of just a tempo deck that also has the V-Star power that gives you the nuts, right? So you just don't whiff, and you're actually a fast deck, but you also have that fallback plan of the ability sometimes just wins games. Yeah. Okay. So that's one of my best performing decks actually right now in the format. I would definitely put it tier 1.
I love to hear that after you came on and absolutely hated on Duraludon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do these things just to like have a stance. I look at like how the games have gone, and like objectively looking at the Duraludon deck, it wins because its ability says it wins, right? And the deck itself is just useless. But now the list is actually good and still has the ability, so it's like just a very good deck.
No, that's exciting to hear, because I hate to use the word pile to describe a deck, but if I were to ever describe a deck as a pile of cards, the current Duraludon list.
I mean, you look at Adventurous Discovery and you objectively think this can't be the right way to play this deck, right? But somehow it's the best of what we have in standard, but it gets way cleaner next set, I think. Okay. So those are my favorite Arceus decks. I think there's also, I know in Japan, Arceus Ice Rider is super popular. Sylveon gets a bit of a boost by having Arceus. There's a lot of things that can reasonably just shove in an Arceus, like thin line, and it's never terrible, especially decks that play like Capture. I've actually enjoyed Suicune Ludicolo with like a 1/1 package of Arceus, or even a 2/2 with 1 double turbo energy, because realistically it also enables you to make like boss plays later on by attacking with Arceus and double attaching to a Suicune on the bench. Means that you're always getting a boss play in, which is like kind of not always the case with Suicune unless they're gusting Lotads because they're scared. So I think it's a really nice like mini package in decks that play Captures or just play the 8-ball search anyway. You can justify it a lot. I think the cards just that ability is crazy, right? And we have basically no other good V-Star powers to use right now, like maybe Leafeon. So why would you not just hit double cram heads, right? Basically is what you're doing in the worst description ever of the card. I mean, but yeah,
when you describe it like that, it is definitely kind of scary.
Spicy, right? Yeah.
And it's also 280 HP as a bench sitter, which is
right.
Very beefy. Very few decks are gonna boss KO a 2-prize 280 HP bench sitter. Like,
Mhm.
I
And
it's
just
Mew.
by having Raihan in your deck, you can also like make it an attacker, right? You can just Raihan for the attachment and then go ahead and search the deck for like, even if you're playing 1 or 2 copies of Double Turbo, it then becomes a threat that powers up your board. So it's just like very useful. You can force them to go through a 280 hit point 2-prizer at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So we're high on Arceus so far, it sounds
like. Arceus is great. Yeah. Arceus is what it's hyped up to be. As a tech in a lot of decks, but also like it's probably the face of at least a couple archetypes.
Have you played? This is the one that I keep coming back to, except the fact fighting Pokemon exists. Just like a quad Arceus, Charon's Care, the deck that they're clearly trying to give us this format. Is that?
I don't think. Yeah, I don't think it gives us enough against Mew, and that really is the long story short. I don't think you have enough against them. Because like Sharon's Care is kind of good, but 280 is not actually that big against a lot of things. Like Single Strike is always going to like knock through you. Ludicolo will knock through you. Ice Rider will knock through you, and Mew can knock through you as well. So you actually don't do Sharon's Care at all, right? You have one in your deck, and maybe sometimes it happens. But if you're getting hit with an Arceus anyway, you're already very ahead in a prize race. You'd rather just boss most of the time and get further ahead, right? So I don't think Sharon's Care is that good. I don't mind just like Arceus with a Dunsparce and with Inteleon pings, because after you've used your Starbirth, you are lacking that bit of draw. So whether it's Inteleon or whether it's Bibarel or whatnot, you like having that little bit extra supplement. But yeah, I don't think it does enough just as a colorless poke.
Okay. That totally makes sense. But the part of me that loved Acerola and loved that idea of like Zoropod was my preference over Zoroark. I just give me one turn to put this thing back in my hand, and suddenly I'm ahead on the prize race. And I keep coming back to that idea, but everything you said makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So outside
of
I
wanted to try it too. Yeah.
Outside of Arceus, we said we get nothing really new.
So fire is like the next sort of like tempting thing, right? That stadium is pretty tempting. It's good acceleration.
Entei? Is Entei Ludicolo ever better than Suicune?
So you don't actually have the space for the whole thing, because the annoying thing about Entei, right, is so Ludicolo plays, or Suicune plays like no stadiums, right? The Ludicolo build, or it plays 1 maybe, whereas Entei needs to fit spaces for 4 and like lots of switch cards, because you can't just play Balloon because Entei has the chunky retreat cost. So it's really hard. Like you actually need to play switches and ropes. So that's like 8 more spaces that you need to play in the Entei list, which is a lot of spaces when you're trying to be a candy deck. So either you play like Ludicolo without the Inteleon, which sounds disgusting, or you play Inteleon without the Ludicolo and you're lacking the burst potential. But you are fast. That's like the good news for you, right? Because you have the stadium, you can try and come into the active and get that early tempo like KO. But it doesn't really like see you through to that mid-late game unless you go boxy with it with different type coverage mons, or you try the Charizard. But then again, a lot of your space is dedicated to like non-fast cards like Raihan and maybe EXP Share, these sorts of things, and it doesn't feel that good. So you're like watering down your own deck. So I don't think Fire is going to be great unless you get techie with it. So it's probably not going to see like the heights right now. I don't think there's enough there just in terms of good Fire attackers.
Okay, that makes sense, because I felt like Entei was getting all of the hype initially, or a lot of the hype initially, and then suddenly no one said anything about it ever again.
I was one of the people really hyped about Entei as well, because just thinking about how good Suicune's been when it's been having to staple a Melanie to its turn every game, whereas Entei has the flexibility to boss and the flexibility to research a lot more because your acceleration's through Stadium. So I really was excited for it, but just the space it takes up to negotiate the Entei the entire time is really awkward, and it's actually just hard to find the stadium, right? We have no card that can chew to the stadium. So you have to do exactly. You got Drizzile, but that's turn 2, right? And you want to attack turn 1 if you're going to be this tempo 2 prizer. The only other thing that I haven't explored enough is like Cape of Toughness and Heat Fire Energy, and try and just be big chunky fire stuff, right? Put yourself up to 300 hit points and like try and slow roll the opponent a bit more and not have Basin, just have other acceleration like Raihan.
That was going to be my question. Like, but Magma Basin damages you, so it sounds like...
Yeah, exactly. So it's counterintuitive to the fire support that we already have in the game. But that's like the last ditch effort I'll try with fire before just not playing it again for a bit.
Is like Victini ever the move with Magma Basin, or
I mean, you get some turn 1 tempo plays, but Victini, as we know it right now, is a quad deck, and its win rate is based on Path and Hammer, right? So I don't even know if...
I mean, you can keep those hammers in there.
State. Yeah, you can keep the hammers, but then you also need to play switch cards, right? Because Basin's only the bench, so it's like it takes so much space.
Oh, wait, it's only to the bench?
Yeah, it's only to the bench. It's a Malamar.
Oh, yeah. That's not as good as I thought it was.
That's what makes it. Yeah, that's what makes it that little bit more awkward.
Always read your cards, kids. That first day on PTCGO, I 100% would have just clicked on it and then been really upset that I can't click on the right Pokemon.
Yeah. Otherwise, you could do some really cool stuff like Rotom Phone and Fleet-Footed to try and hit the stadium that bit more. I've tried stuff like that. Yeah. But yeah, and unfortunately, it doesn't work out like that.
You can play Kindler.
I mean, it's a card that exists, so I don't know if you'd ever play it. Like, maybe if you're playing Inteleon Engine or Luminion, you play like 1. But I feel like a look at 7 cards, even if you're picking 2 of anything you want, it's not that strong. And you have so much discard already for Fire now with Quick and Ultra Ball. It's never an issue. So it's not really filling a niche that you need too much, unless like you have drawn into a hand of like 2+ Basin and 2+ Fire, and you just don't want to research. It's like such a specific case where you don't just want to dump and draw.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. It's like, in theory, there's synergy with a lot of stuff, but also research exists.
Yeah. Literally that, yeah.
What are some other things that you've... Ooh, wait, one more fire deck that we have to mention. Leonzard. Tier 1 or Tier S?
That's what Rahul had, right, on his tier list. He put it super high.
I think so.
And unironically, it did get a lot of stuff. Like Manaphy actually lets us look at 1 prizes so that they're not memes. So in general, Leonzard is one of the higher power level single prizes out there because it can 1-hit KO VMAXs eventually, right? And more consistently than before, because you don't have to play the Leon to get to 330. You can choice belt and have them all in the bin, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So I've tried it, and Cincino is actually like a monster buff to this deck because you actually get to keep what's it called? Call for Family, right? Yep. For 2 mons, to not just like insta brick. So that is like massive for the deck. Cincino Engine, I'm really enjoying, to be honest, and Charizard gives you extra push potential as well.
Or enjoying in the Leonzard deck specifically?
Enjoying period. Like, okay. It's better for like the Surfetch deck. I've tried it with like ice, like a speedy water build, which is like trying to hit the turn 1 Melanie because we have Crobat and Luminion now, and Ultra Ball. So we have like more discard cards to actually hit the turn 1 Melanie, and then you just have Cincino like backing you up to draw like late game the Leon choice belt combo for your Ice Rider, essentially.
Okay.
So Cincino's just cracked, honestly, next set. I think it gets way better. Like, just look at how good of Inteleon was and how often like Jolteon got bailed out by just Keep Calling from Sobble.
Yep.
Now you staple that onto Cincino. It's like so good. But yeah, anyway, Leonzard hits high damage. It still gets ruined by its own prizes, and it gets ruined by its own battle sense sometimes because you need to play like 3 Ordinary Rod. You need to play Roseanne's Backup is actually a big card for the deck because it can get you back Basin, it can get you back Choice Belt, and it can get just Fire Energy back and extra Charizard pieces or like Charmeleon or something, so that you can survive on like just the candies on their own. So it's actually like gained some big cards, and it's been like okay in testing, but I don't think it's good. I don't think it's like crazy good, especially because I think there'll be faster 1 prizes that will just feast on you anyway. So it's like the Rapid Mallies or the Mad Parties or those sorts of decks. Whichever one comes out on top will just bully like the stage 2 version that we get from, you know, Leonzard or, you know, the Torterra deck or whatever you want to go for, right?
Are you going to pretend that Torterra deserves to be mentioned, or? Okay.
No, I mean, it's terrible.
I did not get to watch that stream, but I was told about that stream.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's sorry to everyone listening who likes Torterra, but don't be shocked. Don't be shocked. No one's shocked.
Yeah.
So I'm in love with, and I told you this when we started, I'm in love with the janky 1 prize. That's always been my go-to. The Buzzgarb Shrines of the world, the Grand Bulls of the world, or that my heart is with them. Mostly because I can brick for 3 turns and still win the game.
Yeah. But just having more than 4 turns, that's crazy.
It's so nice. It's so freaking good. What are some of those other like one prize that you already mentioned? Mad Party and Rapid Strike Mally. I don't know if you want to jump into any of those, or what are some other ones that we should be looking out for people like me who want to play the jank? The good.
So
jank,
I know that
good jank.
Yes. So I know there's hype for Mad Party, but I think it's still quite bad just because it loses to Inteleon engines and it still loses to Duraludon straight away. And I rate like a lot of those pretty high. But I think Rapid Strike Mally is pretty good, to be honest. I think Mew is a bad matchup if they play Oricorio, but otherwise it's usually a good matchup. It's literally down to that break point of how many cards you see from Cynthia's Aspiration. Plus whatever you can do with your shady dealings that turn.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, because I've recently figured this one out, so I do have to say it for anyone who doesn't do the math at home. The Oricorio makes you need 9 cards instead of 8, which is absolutely freaking massive amount of cards.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically just not happening for that Mally unless your Cynthia draws you purely Rapid Strike cards. Basically, and you hit like a net that then lets you pick up artillery for 2 more, right? So but yeah, I think that deck's actually pretty good. It bullies like single strike decks. It's really good into Arceus decks as well because 280 is such an easy threshold when you have the Cynthia now. So I think it's like a pretty solid deck actually. One of my favorite single prizes. I also think the Cawthorn deck gains a lot just by having Manaphy, so you don't just have the horrible matchup spread that you used to have, which was like bullying some decks and completely crumbling against others.
I'm still amazed at how often I beat Jolteon with that deck. Like, it's Weezing's good. Are you still playing Weezing in the deck, or are you back to the Moltres?
The first thing I cut was
well, it's
Weezing.
been a great podcast. I'll talk to you later.
But the reason why you're beating the Jolteon, right, is because
it's Weezing. It's Weezing.
Because of Weezing,
100%.
But now you can one card Manaphy wins that, and you gain so much space for the consistency and choice belt now, which is really good for math fixing with the bird, especially with quick shooting pings. It can come online way quicker. And it's even good for Sableye reaching as well. So it's really, really good. I think the Cawthorn deck makes a lot of sense right now, especially if you're just like kind of don't know what to play, but at least want to have a good Mew. I feel like that's a really decent choice.
And there's a lot of people listening to this. Well, we never even talked about if we thought locals are going to come back, but let's assume locals come back. At least one of you listening to this, and I'm probably looking at myself in the mirror, are going to say 19 of the 25 people at this League Cup are playing Mew. So it is the perfect deck for that, because now, like you said, the belt is going to help fix some of the stuff in there. Like the Oricorio meant that they need to take one more prize to KO off of the Moltres, and now you're going to need, I think it's 3 is the official number now. 5, 10, yeah. Versus with the Oricorio, they need to have taken 4 prizes, which is putting you on a very, very sketchy clock. So that's a big difference maker for sure. So good deck. But I was going to ask a follow-up question for that one. We've seen the Japanese list. Well, I've seen the Japanese list that plays the Galarian Zapdos V with the Hoopa Moltres, etc. deck. Are you testing that one for the Arceus and Gengar You don't need it for Gengar. Gengar's free. But are you playing that for the Arceus matchups and whatnot, or are you just straight?
Yeah, so Arceus has actually been one of the hardest matchups, and one of the only reasons that I've actually thought about keeping Weezing in is so that they can't V-Star power, right? So you try and just like keep them off attacking like you would any other deck, you know? But yeah, the Zapdos, again, is a space-efficient way of actually trying to solve that matchup, because 280 is such a slog for you to get through in that early game. You just have no upfront pressure, right? And throwing like 4 Hoopers at them is terrible. And like, it's just such a bad deal. And they've already got all their attackers powered up. They're going to make you try and go through 2 Arceus as well, if it's like a pure Arceus deck, which is just so much meat to get through. So I think it's a worthy include if you're expecting a lot of Arceus. If you just want to go straight, like you can, but it's going to be a dicey matchup, I think.
Speaking of the V-Star stuff, just a real quick of like, I haven't played that matchup, but I can confirm I played Nazul Subternia and I played against Glaceon V-Star with the Hoopa Moltres deck. That was a really tough matchup because 2 prizers with 260 HP are really frustrating, especially pre-choice belt. So I can only imagine 280 is and especially on a good card instead of Glaceon is even harder.
Yeah, that's rough. And if they were to play the random Sharons or whatever, then you are crying.
Oh yeah, that's just GG's at that point. Like, so yeah, it's a consideration there. Mad Party's bad. I think that's fair. When we had LDF on, I was like, all right, LDF, sell me on Mad Party. He's like, bro, that thing's gotta suck. Quick shooting exists. And I was like, oh, okay. Clearly it's not good.
Yeah, I tried putting in like a 1/1 Gorobis, and oh man, it's just not worth the effort. Yeah.
Now you play it with a Zoroark, right? And so you play a 0/1. You're not into this. You've already
Sure. Tell me Wormadam as well. Like, why not? Yeah.
But why not Wormadam? It's just Vespiquen Night March all over again, right?
Wait. Genius.
Now we're in. What was I gonna say? Oh, so single prize decks, it sounds like Rapid Mally, pretty darn high on. Moltres Hoopa, you're also fairly high on. Leon Zard, less so.
Yeah. It's functional now. Yeah.
There we go. That's something at least, right?
Yeah.
And Torterra doesn't even exist.
Nah.
What are some other... So far, we know Mew is good, right? And Arceus, it seems like it's a matter of what is the best at the time, what is going to be good with. Like, there's just a lot of questions, and the answer to all of them is yes. Like...
Yeah, there's different degrees of yes, but basically I don't think any Arceus deck should fall below like tier 2 just because you have the high roll of the V-Star power to have like the optimal turn, basically. So yeah, I think Arceus will just inherently be very decent. I think there's going to be a number of like fighting plus dark decks in the meta naturally because of that as well. Like you want to have the answers to Mew, and Arceus is weak to fighting, so the likes of the Surfetch deck loves the new Cincino, the new Mincino as well. So I think that has a lot of potential. Obviously, single strike, both the Gengar and the Urshifu gain a lot actually. Ultra Ball's a big deal for the deck because obviously you're a setup deck. So any additional cards you can get turn 1 from bigger Crobat digs is massive. Especially if it can hit like Capture Energy, then you're like laughing, right? Such a big card for the Umbreon list. So I really like that, and just the fact that you've been playing like Great Ball or VIP Pass just to fill the void in that deck, now being replaced with Ultra Ball is such a big upgrade for you. So the Gengar deck appreciates that as well. It's a really nice include for those sorts of things, and it can even fix some weird like hands where you've drawn too many of the energies. Right, you can just have extra discards energy and reload them. So it gives you some nice redundancy there as well. So yeah, I think Single Strike gains a good amount. Just because it's one of the brickier decks. We've seen that, like, because you're not playing Inteleon, you brick more than most other things. So just getting some percentage points is a big, big deal for the archetype when it already has, like, the ability to wall break Duraludon, the weakness on Mew and Arceus. It just feels like a well-rounded choice for the most part. There's not too many matchups that you're terrified of outside of, like, Suicune or Ice Rider.
Is this just the Tina tags argument all over again? Which is like the deck has answers for everything. The deck, is going to brick all the time, but also you beat this, you have this thing. Your late game is this. Like, everything is like, you have the answer to literally everything except how to not go O2.
Yeah. It's a lovely on paper deck for sure. And it's just navigating the hands is your biggest issue most of the time. You're not as afraid of your opponent. You're mostly afraid of yourself.
Are you playing Luminion in it? Or is that still like
yeah, so I've had double bats, and I'm enjoying double bat the most, but Batfish is also really good. It means that you don't need to always have Umbreon like developed to be able to be reliably bossing, which is like a really big deal sometimes for the deck. So I can see it being 1-1 split, or even if you have the space, go 2-1 if you really want to. But it's still a tight deck, obviously, especially if you're trying to fit in Choice Belt, which I think is weird because I think I've had it at 3 count, 2 count, and 1 count and 0 count because you are still a pile at the end of the day. So I've tried all of the renditions of how much you want Choice Belt because it's such a big deal for Umbreon, right? Umbreon goes from like that stupid 160 up to 180 up to 210 so nicely, or up to 220 with double single strike energy.
Yeah.
So it's such a big deal to actually be like pointing at what you want to kill turn 2. And cosplay as an Arceus, basically. That's essentially what that deck does. Or Mew, right? Yeah.
So you're just a bad Mew and a bad Arceus.
Well, you're dark. That's the good news.
There we go. So obviously this is a meta call thing, but are you leaning more towards Umbreon? Are we leaning more towards the Urshifu? Are we back to the weird 3-2 split of each? Like, how? What are you thinking feels the best so far as a starting point?
Yeah, I still think I would probably be at least a couple Urshifu VMAX because I also really like Duraludon and I just want to have an answer for it.
I don't think you're doing this content creator thing right. You're supposed to say VMAX is bad and then win a tournament with Duraludon, get the clicks, and then win a tournament. You're
too honest. And I've always been a bigger fan of the Umbreon build personally. Like I've never been a massive fan of Gengar. It feels too one-dimensional for me. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you're having to play Path of the Peaks just to improve a Mew matchup when you're a pure Dark deck, that's like, come on, you know, that really is like, do your job, please.
That was one of my favorite asking a Gengar player this format. But it's like, what if you just cut the paths and take the L to Duraludon because no one plays it at the tournament they were going to go to? And they're like, oh, I need it to beat Mew. Like, yeah, I think you need a new deck. Like, that's not correct.
Yeah, pretty sad. But yeah, the Urshifu's baked in deal with Duraludon and is good against the Arceus, right? So it's just a solid card again, I think, or like has a lot more benefits to it than pure Gengar.
Have you gone much into pure Gengar? Not we. I've done none of this, but it seems in theory, right? Like you can OHKO stuff with that second attack and the choice belt. Is that a realistic thing?
Belt is solid for sure, and like I was saying with Zapdos being solid, it means that there's just more V's around, so the Gengar hits higher damage output for 2 attachments. But also Zapdos being around makes a pure Gengar deck much worse. So yeah, it just feels way less well-rounded to me. Like your matchup spreads go from like relatively evens across the board with the Urshifu build to just like good and bad, good and bad, good and bad. So you're much more like targeting than being like a well-rounded deck yourself.
Gotcha. So your idea is like Gengar seems like a meta call of like into certain things it's probably absolutely good, but otherwise it's
yeah. Okay. I think it will crumble to some matchups, and that's just a bad feeling for me as a player.
That's good to know. But like you said, you've mentioned Zapdos multiple times already, which is terrifying for Gengar because Gengar probably has to Crobat once or Lumineon or whatever, and you have to have your Gengar down, and that's just a Raihan away or 2 turns away from just getting.
Yep. And if they play Moltres E-Switch as well, like it's normally Zapdos with Galarian Moltres. So like it's actually live for them like a good amount. Yeah.
What else, before we get into some questions from Twitch chat, what is at least one more deck that you're like, this has been something that you want to test? Maybe your channel hasn't gotten around to it yet, or you want to revisit it more because it turned out to be less of a meme than you thought, or what is one more thing?
Sure. I think Ice Rider, a lot of people are looking towards just because of the damage potential that it has now with Belt. I think it's a real temptation to be able to instant respond an Arceus without hitting for weakness and having the reach on Mew. I think it does kind of crumble as long as Mew actually plays Oricorio. I've always been anti-Oricorio, but the stats are showing that it's like more popular than not right now in the format, which I find really weird because you want to draw more cards with Genesect the entire time, but that's again like beside the point.
I keep sitting here as the Hoopa player, like just cut it. It's not good anymore. Just cut it. And they just keep not. It just makes our matchup so much better.
Yeah, true.
Anyway.
But yeah, Ice Rider, I think I'm liking Tempo Ice Rider more than like a Arceus Ice Rider or just the Pathy build, with Inteleons. I think I like aggro, fish, bats, hit straight away with Suicune. I think it's really good damage potential now with Choice Belt early on, that you actually one-shot Mew, Genesect, and a lot of other things like pretty early on, and it helps you race pretty effectively. So I definitely am interested in speedy Ice Rider builds that has it as a finisher and an answer to Arceus, and could even be playing spicy cross switches as well for like late game potential. So that's like the last thing that I'm still toying with, but I've been all over the place with Ice Rider. Like started with Inteleon, tried a pure Arceus, tried it with Arceus and Inteleon, and now we're on to like the speedy build, which I'm like kind of happiest with. That's also because it plays Cincino, and Cincino is pretty cracked right now. Yeah.
So how fast is the speedy build where you're willing to bench Crobats and Lumineons? Because those are just boss Technoblast away from losing in 3 turns.
Yeah, but if you took the first 2, it doesn't matter, right? If you took the first 2, you're doing the same thing back to them.
So you're consistently like not only going very fast, but you're consistently getting the Melanie attach plays.
Oh,
off
Melanie
that deck.
attach happens a ton, right? Because you play double bat fish and 8 ball search outs now. And my favorite one prizer is Mew from Celebrations, actually. It's a far cry from Jirachi, but it's like by far my favorite punching bag in the game. Because it's really good with Arceus, it's really good with like any of these speedy 2 prize decks. So I think there will be a number of these decks that is trying to go pure 2 and 1 prize only. Like I also think there's a potential for a pure Galarian Moltres deck because Choice Belt improves its numbers up to 220 so nicely. So you can have that and have the fallback of like the Clara thing as well, but have the Mew in the opening helping you hit like E-searches, Quick Ball, Ultra Ball, that sort of thing, because they're so integral to Galarian Moltres actually setting up in the first place. So yeah, that's like my favorite one prize card Pokemon in the format outside of like the evolving stuff.
So you're telling me the way to combat Meloetta and Mew is with your own Mew to take
baby Mew. Yeah, exactly. He's betraying himself. Yeah. You need a punch bag. It's like 100% mandatory, I think. And if it brings Mew to the point where it has to play catchers like it does sometimes now, it's like, fine, do what you want. Like, you're taking out spaces for so many good cards, and you're flipping heads on not only Cram but Catcher on me as well. It's like, yeah, good for you, buddy.
I mean, yeah, have you considered just flipping heads? That's
true. You can't do much about that, unfortunately.
One more important question before we get into some questions from Twitch chat, which we have quite a few questions from chat, but you have yet to mention one of my favorite cards, which is the B-Barrel, sorry. We're gonna pronounce it. Your official TPCi caster. I gotta bring my proper. Your B-Barrels. Why are you not mentioning Sushi Master Volume 2?
It's mostly because of how much I love Mincino, actually, and stupid Bidoof does nothing for you, right? He doesn't do anything.
We just lost half of our listenership after calling Bidoof stupid. I hope you know that.
Well, he's stupid compared to Mincino and Sobble, right? These guys are so busted when you start with them and you're bricking, because they just do so much. I think Bibarel's fine. I can see him being like a bit part player here and there. But he's just so much slower than Fish and Bat, right? He's not doing anything turn 1. And if you want to be a fast deck, you need to still play those. I mean, you can play him in those like mostly 2 prize decks as just getting you some incremental value. And, you know, he helps you fish towards boss and whatnot and still get your attachment and this, that, and the other. So he's not bad, obviously. But I think I would mostly, because I also want so many, like, I want to have at least 4 one prize Pokemon that can just be a punch bag anyway. It's not like I'm ever going to play that thick of a barrel, but I'll always play that thick of a Cincino or Inteleon. But I just want those in the active because punch bag is so important.
Yeah.
Like, realistically, like, we've tested so much Mew. We've tested like 200 games against Mew already. And like, I can't think of a better answer. Like, outside of just, I've cheesed you with a path and I've manied you and it's worked somehow. It's like, it's such a bad feeling. It's much better to just have a punch bag, honestly.
I guess one more thing then. Okay, first off, the call for family is a very good argument. I want to say that is convincing me more than I thought it would, because like you said, using Keep Calling in a Rapid Strike deck is one of the best feelings in the world, because suddenly you're like, I can attack on turn 2. Sick. I no longer lose the game. So that's a super good argument. But oh my gosh, now I forgot where I was going to go with this. Oh, we've been ignoring it, but we have to reach the elephant in the room, or what the heck is a Mew?
It's like a cat, right?
Like, it's a cat. We're gonna go to the pink cat in the room. Don't sell me too much, but Mew. Why is Mew the BDIF still?
Well, in standard right now, its lowest win rate matchup is like 41%. And it gets better and more consistent at what it does best. And it's less weak to Fan now, which is like a big counterplay that at least like the Suicune deck does, and all these other decks try and throw in Fan here and there if they're Inteleon based. Like Jolteon tries to do it as well to buy those turns to breathe. And that just doesn't work because they're double turbo now. So as long as they like hit their double turbo or cram heads at like mid game, they still kill you. And it means from a 0 energy board, they can still not only kill you, but they can boss kill you as well. So it's like even better in the mid game than it was, and more consistent in the early game. So I just think, yeah, the deck is even more crazy, actually. So the meta's going to be even more warped, I think, towards Path Dark, and whichever the best Path/Dark deck that can beat the other decks in the format is like a really good formula.
Gengar is both Path and Dark,
but it does lose to lots of things. Like it's not like it's not broad enough of a deck to not get countered by a Zapdos kicking it in the head, basically, right? That instantly wins the matchup.
Which is, I'm all for it. I love one card decks. I'm all for welcome Zapdos, our new anti-Gengar overlord. So, and this is me testing for Salt Lake City in like 3 weeks. Counts of Mew that you have tested. How many double turbo energies have you messed around with? And what's felt good or not felt good for that?
So 2 and 1. I think you always play the 4 fusion. I think, again, I respect Duraludon, so I'm still playing 2 Psychic, and I'm at 2 Court, and I'm either between 1 and 2 double turbos. I think 1's felt the best just because it's an extra speed card, basically. And it's just such a get out of jail free card if you've like whiffed on a turn, dare I say it, with Mew. That you're still like in the game and not worried.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into some questions from Twitch chat. So the first one is from Mr. Darth B. How do 2 to 3 prize decks survive matching up into newly buffed 1 prizers? Are decks like Arceus, Ice Rider forced into Inteleon builds to improve those matchups and keep the top spots in the meta?
So I think Arceus decks naturally are pretty decent just because they have such high hit points in the opening stages that normally Arceus is tanking hits early on. So I don't think it's necessarily a big problem there. I think, Single Strike can try and attack with its Houndowers and Houndooms and even more Morpeko, which I think is pretty decent actually recently to help the Mew matchup and stay off the prize race or force them onto odd prizes when you're trying to use 2 prizes all the time. So I think those are pretty reasonable. I do think that Malamar's so linear that you can try and force that map the way you want to, even though you are playing 2 and 3 prizes. So trying to like promote that 3 prizer as early as possible to try and make them have like the nuts before they hit big Shady Inteleon or like lots of Cinccino's, whichever build they're going for. You can try and sponge that hit, then go back onto the bench. So I don't think it's like unsurmountable for any of these decks. And obviously we know Inteleon has good precedent in the past to be good against 1 prizes. So that still should be decent.
Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like there's just like a lot of ways. Like as hype as we were on 1 prize, there's a lot of ways that they keep.
It's not like they're just going to dominate that, right? It's not like 2 and 3 prizes still aren't good. They're of course still broken for a reason. 1 prize has struggled with like so many issues. It wasn't just Manaphy that unlocks everything.
I really was hoping you were going to say it was Manaphy that unlocks everything. Give me a 6 turn game that takes 20 minutes. I'm in.
Yeah.
Giroxable asks, now regionals are being held in the Brilliant Stars format. What deck would you bring to one? So what would be your number 1 deck? Let's say regionals this weekend for some reason.
It would be Mew. Sorry. I was someone that played Pikarom, that played ADP, that played best deck in format. I'm very much someone that doesn't care about anything else.
Never apologize for playing Pikarom. That is a positive, not a negative.
Yeah. I think for what it's worth, my second favorite choice right now is Arceus Duraludon. I think it has a lot of legs.
So to go off the, like, I always play the best deck in format, is that something you would recommend to people going to regionals? Just as like a kind of a blanket of like, oh, I'm really unsure, we don't have much experience doing a meta game or stuff like that. Is it sometimes as simple as we'll just play the best deck forehead?
I've won decks playing rogues and counter picks, and I've won playing with best decks. It's normally way easier with the best deck because they do the best things. And normally the stats are like just so. I mean, when it's Mew specifically, when you just get to outdraw every other deck, it's just such a hard argument to say that you shouldn't play it, because like I said, looking at Trainer Hill, like having the worst matchups be like 40% is fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
In best of three is 40%, and you're drawing well almost every game, and the opponent isn't drawing well almost every game, you still win that 2 out of 3 like very, very often. So it's like if you're beating counter decks and pretty solidly beating most other decks, you're gonna be fine, you know. For me specifically, it's just far, far better than other decks. So even the rogue or counter play argument is a hard one to get your head around.
That is something. So people go into best of 3 with like a couple mindsets. One is you only have to set up 2 out of 3 times, and the other one is exactly like you said. Why don't you just set up every game, and then you pretty much take a guaranteed game against those people that are like you only got to set up twice.
Yeah.
So it sounds like when the Mew level of consistency, you're kind of like just be the consistent one.
And you know, people I've been to, you know, day one worlds, and people have played decks that are like weak against the strongest deck in format as well, and hope to only hit them twice. Like there's multiple ways you can get a 6-2-1 record and make day 2, you know. So you shouldn't have to try and outthink like 500 people in a room. Just it's so much easier to be the problem, and we already have such a good precedent of like we know what the best deck is. It only changes like 5 cards. So you should already be super comfortable with how to play the deck. Yeah.
Tabletop Village. Shout out to sponsor Tabletop Village, located in Seattle, Washington. Buy them off TCG Player. Guaranteed get the condition you asked for. Tabletop Village asks, how many quick balls and ultra balls do I run in a Brilliant Stars legal tournament this Friday in Mute?
4 of each. They are crazy. They are the craziest, actually. They are so important.
All right, does that include 4 Battle VIP Pass?
Play 4 of those as well. I would play 3 Fog.
That's disgusting.
but 4 of everything else.
So you're like guaranteed 6 Pokemon turn 1.
Don't you want that? That's busted.
I mean, I know it is. I'm mostly upset at that concept right now.
It's also just Ultra Ball makes Rotom Phone such a better card, man. You just want to see that combination. It's so nice. Yeah.
DA Askew asks, you kind of already mentioned it, but Magma, Base, and Firebox. So I'm getting into Moltres, the Charizard V-Star. You kind of mentioned them, but any other thoughts on those as the Firebox version? Is there anything that's good in them, bad in them, etc.?
So there's a couple of ways that I've looked at for box, and obviously Galarian Moltres is like, it's basically the Galarian birds are just so good. Their types are so good that you just kind of shove them in. Mm-hmm. And you play some Fire Energy as well. The other like funny box is that you can try and play amazing rare Reshiram that hits 270 for Dark, Lightning, Fire. And if you play Dark Energies already because you're Galarian Moltres, it's not crazy to also play Lightning Energy because you're playing Raihan. I mean, it is crazy and it's bad.
Yeah.
But you can hit 270 with a one prizer, which is pog and funny. But yeah, I think mostly the Firebox stuff is going to be worse than Arceus box stuff. Even though it's like the Arceus box stuff is slightly slower tempo because it doesn't have turn 1 pressure outside of like maybe a Hooper attacking for 90 damage. Mm-hmm. So I think those will be far better than a Fire toolbox.
That actually makes, I don't want to hear that, but that does make sense.
Yeah.
Drew asks, you kind of already got into this, but thoughts on Suicune Ludicolo? You mentioned Arceus V-Star is a good 1/1 in it, but other thoughts overall on the deck?
I really like it. I think Jolteon is probably looking sketchier, right? Because there's Manaphy coming out for one prize decks, which actually makes them legitimately bad matchups. Mm-hmm. And Jolteon has a slightly worse time into Mew now because Choice Belt is a really good damage modifier for allowing them to one-shot, more reliably, even if it is just like a once per game thing. So, yeah, I think Jolteon's stock goes down quite a bit, which is one of the big reasons keeping it at bay right now in our format. So I'm a big fan of Suicune Ludi because also Choice Belt really helps it into Mew, not only so that you can like take knockouts turn 1 potentially, but also even if they only have like a full bench rather than a full bench, you can still belt and kill them with Ludicolo. So like they basically can't play around your damage output. So that matchup gets like way more solid, especially because they don't play hand disruption typically, right? So you can actually formulate those combos and they can't stop you at all really now.
are we still into the like thick Ludicolo line? Because for a while it was like 202, and now it seems to be people are on like a 413 with like 4 rare candies or whatever. Like, which way
I
are
like.
you going with that?
I'm at 302 with 3 candy. I think
Okay.
that's my favorite way. It's important to double Lotad in a decent number of matchups, so I like having 3 Lotads for that reason, and because it has Call for Family, which is also Pog.
The fact that deck has no bad starters is so
really
good.
nice, right? Yeah, really nice, really nice.
Googats asked, how good are Wheezing decks next format? So you said you cut Wheezing, but overall, have you tested Wheezing in anything besides the Moltres deck?
This is probably one of my like worst biases, I guess. I try to basically test everything, but I really dislike Wheezing as a card because it's just saying, do you have it? And if the opponent has built their deck relatively well, they should have it more often than they don't. But that's not always how things work right now. I do think there's less. Yeah, I do think there's less reliance on Inteleon engines in general. So there'll be more like actual supporters in decks. Like we'll be seeing more for research 3 Marnie sort of things, which makes Wheezing like kind of worse. But there is more lean into like Crobat and Luminion, so that kind of like counterbalances, I guess. But at least they're drawing ball search cards now, right? So at least they're attacking you back, and that's really bad. So just the fact that they have more ball search means they attack you more, and that's not very good for you because you're hoping they just like don't attack you as Wheezing. So yeah, I would say it's probably worse, but I am very anti-Wheezing already in the format, so I am probably the worst person to ask and need to test that more, unironically.
I'll test it for you. Don't.
Please do. I would rather not.
I mean, with that said, you're 100% correct, right? Like, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm like 50-50 against Jolteon, and it's literally just Ascension. Oh, you don't have it because you play 3 draw supporters? Cool, yeah. I can win the game now. Like, that's...
Yeah.
That is a primary win condition of the deck. In some certain matchups.
Yeah.
Some matchups you actually have to play the game. And I love those. Those are super fun. Peter M asks, and you can go as detailed or not as you want on this one, but Zard V-Star, too slow or have potential?
Has potential, probably is too much work. I've tested it mostly against Mew because that's my stress test against, like for every deck right now. So it feels worse because it just dies, right? It just gets gusted and doesn't do what you want it to do. But into other matchups, it's actually going to pull off its V-Star power. I think if you do want to do Charizard, to make it reliable, it needs to play right hand and EXP share, and probably like at least 2 of each of those, which is kind of yucky, but it's reasonable. And actually, Charizard V Max is really quite solid. 330 hit points, and the 3 energy 100 is killing Genesects, right? So you can try and shove a big guy out there and try and buy that turn if they've played powers early. And sometimes Entei forces that, right? Especially if they've gone first and haven't damaged their Entei. You force powers out to then allow the VMAX to actually tank a hit, and it lets you kill 2 Genesects, which is some form of comeback for the fire deck, which is cool.
You're actually selling that a lot more than I thought you were going.
I mean, Charizard V Max felt like a very bad card, but actually, you know, as long as you can power it up now, it's solid into Genesect, right? At least. Okay. And you can belt around Oricorio if you have to, so they can't like stop you killing Genesects.
I also want to point out real quick, you mentioned, this is important for everyone listening, you mentioned your stress test everything against Mew. That is a very important part of testing. Testing isn't you and the other person playing your janky, maybe this is good decks against each other, because that's not what the format's going to be like. Very important to shove the Mew against everything, I assume, right?
Yeah, well, it serves 2 purposes, because if you find no deck that you actually like, you've at least jammed lots of games of Mew, so you can always play Mew. Very good.
The perfect, everyone's go-to.
Mm-hmm.
Stellar Wish Gaming asks, what is your favorite deck from Brilliant Stars other than anything with Arceus? You can take favorite however you want to take that.
Oof. Not Arceus. You hate to see it.
Arceus seems like a fun card. Like, that was one of the things, like I said, when we had LDF on, he was just like, just imagine you're bricking and then you evolve and you're no longer bricking. And it was like,
yeah,
yo, I'm in.
That is a feel for sure. That is a big, big feel. I don't know, honestly. I mean, like I said, outside of Arceus decks and maybe Fire decks, there aren't many actual like new things coming out. So it's a hard question. I think I want to try a Zoroark attacking stage 1 box, which is playing like the Flapples and like the Gallipods and stuff like that, which is like kind of fun. So it'll be worth like I'm going to experiment more with that because I think Zoroark is a super fun card. And there's at least something there now with Manaphy and more discard synergy. So
Zoroark's one of those cards that as soon as I read it, I'm like, I'm buying a playset because it is one thing away from becoming a $20 holo rare and tier 1 deck. Like that's such a good card. Have you tested Sanders Control or not yet?
So we've spoken about it in the CCG like chat or whatever, but we haven't actually like. I jammed early games with Floats of Control into Mew. Didn't go well. That's when I was playing 2 double turbos though, so it was naturally like.
Oh, and the double turbo lets you retreat, so you can't even boss stall ads.
Yep. And you can't. You like even if you high roll like Seeking or whatever to remove energies or play the new or not the new but the Celebrations Yveltal that gets rid of tons of gets rid of 3 of their special energy, right, for a twin energy. They just bounce back with double turbo. So I think that's quite bad. But I think there's a reason to play Control. And actually, interesting thing to talk about is how many people who have only played in the online era won't know what to do against Control because they haven't had to play against it in online tournaments. So you may get a lot of free rounds, actually, which is an unknown quantity of how valuable that will actually be. Again, it depends on the ratios of formats or like the tournament as it actually happens, but people will misplay against you hard, I think, if they are only like players from the online era because they haven't had to deal with Control before.
I mean, so when we had Sander on, he mentioned that a lot of times he just walks into day 2 because most people don't know how to play against Control. The one regional I played against Control, almost the same thing. I hit too many Seismitoad decks to walk into day 2, but it was the same of like, oh, I don't have to think because you have no idea what you're doing. You've had to have played Control before. Wasn't it like that before even?
Yeah, it certainly was. And like you really rely on those people who played like Sander or Cremiscoli day 1 to know like what random bulk common you have to search. Like why do I have to play around like Jupiter and cards like that, you know? It's like, oh, he's playing Spider Lock apparently. What does that even mean? Like, hello? It's you hear about it and you have nightmares, but you don't actually know what the cards do, right? Until day 2. So you didn't know that you misplayed until like 7 turns later when they can't lose against you. So yeah.
Europe sounds so much more fun.
No. You don't want to, you don't want that. You don't want that in your life.
I feel like NA, that's never an issue. Like the question's always like, what is, the Azul testing group playing? And it's never, there's no pawn yard in there that I have to go Google real quick, right? Like, and then I see Sander like, I top forward this SPE, and it's like, bro, I have to look up 4 of these cards real quick. Like, I have no idea what.
And I have to scroll through the list because it's like so wide, so many ones. 2 if it's the most important card. That's it. So insane. I don't know how he juggles his own deck lists, honestly. Like the first turn deck search, I'd have like a nosebleed. It's so much.
I forget if you were casting Hog the first year or not, but watching him in the finals do his prize checking, and he actually would scroll through and check his prizes, and he clearly knew what he was doing. And it's like, I'm struggling to check prizes in Mew where I play forums. Like, this is incredible.
How many fusion energy again? Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, wild.
Dragon the Forkhead asks, do you think Mew will die down after Brilliant Stars is out? So in terms of popularity, do you think people are going to start to put it away, see more play?
So it's a really weird balance where the deck itself is way stronger, but also some of the counter decks, mainly just like these Clara, Galarian, Moltres decks, they get way more well-rounded because they don't just lose to Jolteon and Urshifu, which have stayed popular enough in this format and are really good against all of these decks that just like do nothing until Moltres wins. But now those do nothing until Moltres wins decks actually have like a more well-rounded field because they don't just die to the snipers, basically. So it's a hard thing to say. I think there'll still be a number of like path decks and dedicated anti-Mew decks for sure. But I can't see it going away drastically. I think it'll be similar. Maybe like again going back to IRL when it's like actual stakes compared to online play. It could mean that there's like way more Mew as well, so it could end up being like the 25% deck. I'd be surprised by that. I would still expect it to be like 12 to like 15% on the high end of a tournament in terms of representation. But I could see it being much higher day 2 representation.
That's something I tell my chat all the time when I play in these online tournaments. It's like, I'm playing Galarian Moltres because I think it's fun. If I were playing a real event, I would be playing Mew. And
yes.
I know I'm not the only person like myself, where I'm playing the fun deck online because who cares?
Yeah. Versus, well, you saw the deck that randomly top 4'd yesterday. It's like, I'll give it a go. I'm not doing anything tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, Metagross VMAX. Let's try it. I'm not bringing that thing ever to a regional.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the Gyroscope Eevee, last question, asks, if you drink tea, do you put in the milk before or after?
After, obviously.
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 I'll take your word for that, obviously.
Yeah.
I also put it in after. But I'm thinking, who puts it in before? Is that a real thing? Okay.
I don't think I've ever met anyone who has, so...
Okay, so that's just him making up some weird stuff. Love to see.
Yeah.
So if people want to catch your testing, where can they watch it? Where can they find you? Where can they find you? Where if they want more of you?
So youtube.com/Omnipoke is the YouTube channel, and myself and Jack have been making a real point of streaming Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays on twitch.tv/Team Omnipoke. And that is where, at the moment, we're doing gauntlets, where we're playing one deck into a variety of matchups. And we'll be moving into like matchup busters as we get closer to Liverpool, which is going to be a more in-depth look where we play like 4 or 5 games into exactly one matchup and see how it all goes down. So we'll be varying our testing a lot, but we will be testing a lot because we're both going to Liverpool. We both really want to do well and make a splash back when IRL comes back.
For anyone who is looking forward to how do I test for a regional, I've caught some of these streams. They happen when I'm on work, but usually I like catch on a break or something. And these seem like the perfect way to learn how to test. It's not, well, you can do the PTCGO ladder if you have to, but it's like you're running these decks against a gauntlet and figuring out, okay, how do I play against this? How do I play against that? It's like very purposeful, right? You have the same order of how's this do against this? How's this do against this? And for anyone who's wondering, how do I test? Go watch those streams and just kind of absorb some of that information of how they are testing, because you're doing real testing. You're not content creating.
We're trying. We're tryharding. Yeah, we are players at the end of the day. But yeah, and even if you just want to catch like the snippet, we normally chat about the games that's just happened for like the last 10 minutes of the stream. So if you just want to skip to the end and do the cheat sheet version, you can, and get the TLDR from us by that point when we're both tired and salty. So you get the real raw perspective.
I did not know you did that at the end because I've never caught it. So I might actually go back to watch those.
Yeah, we chat through like what we would change and this sort of stuff and our overall feel of the decks. So yeah, it's good.
And of course, myself, you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at mellow_Magikarp. Remember to leave all of the stars in your review, which if you haven't left a review, they are super appreciated. I don't read them because I'm going to be honest with you, I'm afraid. But I appreciate everyone who does that so much. And this has been another episode of the Lake of Rage podcast. Catch you all next week.